Hello friends, in this lecture we will see what is Init, what's Upstart and what's system daemon. So once the Linux machine gets booted up and the kernel hands over the process to the very first process, which is we can call the father of all processes, it is Init process. Now Init has been around since the very early days of Unix when there was System 5. It is written as Roman capital 5 and it was part of Linux standard base. This init process, it works by looking into the directory etc init tab. This is all one word, init-tab. And in this file, there are some entries which define that what would be the default run level of the system and also what are the scripts that need to be run at a certain run level. Like what are the scripts that need to be run at the single user mode or maybe multi-user mode or maybe multi-user mode with networking or maybe for graphical user interface. What are the scripts that need to be run for all of these run levels? Now this Init, it has served the Linux community well for so many years. But the problem is that this init, it executes the scripts in sequential order and also the syntax and the way that it is managed, that is not quite supportive of the new application and the way operating systems are evolving. So Ubuntu came up with their own system and that is called as Upstart. You can check it out at upstart.ubuntu.org. Rather is .com, not .org, it's ubuntu.com. Now this Upstart for Ubuntu, the main feature is that it has got better support for hot pluggable devices. It manages the services in a better way, or I should say faster. And also it can run multiple scripts simultaneously, which essentially means making the system run faster at the boot time. Its main configuration files are in etc/init, and there is an application that we use to control or manage the services, which is initctl or init controller. Now this Upstart, this is available by default since Ubuntu version 14.04. Earlier versions used to have Init. But in parallel to Upstart, there is also another initialization system which is called as System D. And even newer versions of Ubuntu, I believe Ubuntu 15.04, their default initialization system is also System D because this one is more robust. And it's also the default system on Fedora, OpenSUSE, and also on Arch Linux. So these are just the variants of different Linux operating systems. And for them, System D is the default init system. The main features of System D are, of course, it can run multiple processes simultaneously. It has got less processing overhead and it handles the dependencies quite well as compared to this init processor. What happened in case of init was let's say if your process needs to be started, then the other processes also need to be started which were dependent on it. Like if we have certain directory, and I'll just show you what I mean. This there's a directory for init which is etc init.d, and in that there is an rc script, which rc script in fact calls other scripts in different RC directories which are in etc rc.number, which ranges from 0 to usually 6. And then in each rc.0 or whatever the number is, In that directory there are multiple scripts based on that certain run level. Those scripts are usually in shape of K, starting with letter capital K, which means that do not run that script at that certain level or kill that script, and also with capital S, which means that run the script at this particular run level. Also, these scripts have specific starting numbers with them, which would signify that the order of the startup or kill of those scripts. So if an administrator is there, he really need to be aware of all the scripts that are residing or that are to start at a certain run level. For example, if you are to run a script that initiates maybe Apache services, then you wouldn't want that your interface scripts run after the Apache script, because Apache needs to listen on a certain or serve pages based on certain IP address and on certain port. Then unless your interface is up, there is no point in running the Apache process. Now these type of dependencies, they are handled in an improved fashion in systemd1 or systemd. The default configurations file for systemd are in etc systemd and also in user lib and systemd and then system folder. So user lib, systemd, system. They are both the same, but if you want to edit the files, it's better that we do not change the file in this path, which is user lib systemd system. Rather we change them in etc systemd and whatever the configuration files are in there, and they are then updated into this path. Now, just like in case of Upstart for Ubuntu, in systemd, there is a utility or an application that we can use to manage the services, which is called as system controller. So let me pull up the terminal now and let's see some of these settings and directories on actual Linux machines. Okay, so here I am. This is CentOS operating system 7. If I type in uname -a, it's 64-bit architecture, and by default the initialization system for CentOS 7 is systemd. Now I told you that init process, which has been replaced with systemd, it is the first process that gets started, which then brings up or turns on the other processes based on the configuration scripts in there. So let's say the number of processes in it by putting in command psaux and then more. And so it shows us all the processes. And if you look at the output, the very first process which has been started by root, whose process ID is 1, if you look at the command of that, it says user lib systemd and systemd. This is the executable. So what I wanted to show you here is that usually sometimes you cannot make out, and on some of the distribution it becomes really difficult. For example, in Ubuntu 12.04, since those are distributions that were in the phase of transitioning from Init to Upstart, then on those or some other distributions, maybe on Red Hat, then on those distributions you may find certain versions which would support Init and systemd at the same time. So sometimes it becomes difficult to clearly draw the line whether that distribution is using one processor type of Init or the other one. But over here it's pretty clear that systemd is the default Init system for CentOS 7. So if we go to etc and systemd, which holds the scripts for the systemd process, and that if we go into, let's say, we can either check the directories of system or user. User is empty, so let's try to check the system directory, which has got multiple scripts, and these are just the links, and they are linking towards the user lib directory that I told you about. If I put in ls -l, You see that these are just the soft links which are pointing to that user lib system D system and then the actual name of the service. It has also got the directories like default and graphical targets and multi-user target which will hold. They are kind of self-explanatory, these names. They signify that what kind of services will be running at what run level. Like if a user is to log in into a graphical mode, then what are the services that he would be having by default? And similarly, if there is no graphical interface or GUI, but it is in multi-user mode, then what services will be running in there? Now, if I want to see the status of some service or maybe change the service status, I can type in sudo and then system controller, the command that I mentioned earlier, and press enter. I give it my username, and these are the services which are being maintained by the system daemon. So if I bring it down over here and let's see if we can find a service that maybe we can change its status. Bring it down a little bit and maybe a little bit more. So we can change the status of any of these services. Let's just try to change, let's say, this fprint daemon which was up there, which is over here. So this is responsible for fingerprint authentication daemon. So the status, the way to do that would be, again, we need to have root credentials, then sudo, and after that system controller, then whatever I want to do with the service. For example, I can take the status and then the fprint service, the name of that service. So fprint d dot service, and it shows us that the status of this service is loaded, but it is inactive at the moment. So let's try to turn it on by typing in start. Let's see if this gets started, and let's have a look at this status one more time. Now we see that its status has been updated from inactive to active. Now if I show you another file over here, let me just check it if it is in there or not. If I type in sudo vi and then afterwards etc and init tab, which we know is the default or the startup configuration file for init process. So we see that that file is still available. Let's see its contents now, because this file is not used on CentOS 7 operating system. So if I press enter and look at the very first line, it says that init tab is no longer used when using system D. So even if we make changes in here, those changes will not have any effect on the actual services running of this operating system. And over here it also defines the system D uses targets instead of run levels. For example, run level 3 would correspond to multi-user target and run level 5 would correspond to graphical target. And if we want to have the defaults, then we can put in the system get default, and to set the defaults we can put in system set default. But if this was an earlier version, then we would have something like the entry over here which would define the default run level for the system if it had been using init, and also we would have certain entries that would define that what scripts need to be run at certain run level. Like I just mentioned earlier that in case we are to look at init.d directory in etc, then there would be an rc script, and that rc script would call certain other scripts in other rc directories that would be having different numbers in it. And I believe that those directories are not in here. Let me just check if they are available in CentOS. If I type in, let's say cd etc, and let's just look at the contents of this. So if I bring them up a little bit, okay, so, and I believe these are just the symbolic links. Let me just check it using -l. So if I bring it here, okay, so this is in rc.d and likewise rc1.d. So we can have a look at the contents of this rc.d directory. If I type in cd rc.d, and then in that I can go further into init.d, or maybe particularly cd rc1.d, and over here you can see that there are some scripts. They are all starting with letter K, which means that they are to be killed at this run level. And also look at their numbers, the numbers that are just preceding the name of the script. These numbers would signify that in which order or sequence the scripts to be executed. So it would mean that this net console script has to be executed before this network script. Network script cannot be executed before this net console. So a system administrator has to be aware about the sequence of the scripts, that if he wants to tune them, or if he wants to put his own scripts regarding certain services, he needs to be aware that where he needs to put them and when and in which order. Now the scripts are here, and it does not mean that the CentOS 7 operating system it is using init system. It just means that they are here just to provide backward compatibility for init process, or the scripts or the applications that have been written while keeping in mind the init process. They should be able to be executed on the CentOS 7 operating system as well. So now let's just quickly go over to Ubuntu terminal and see if we can find Upstart or init process in there. So I'm here at the Ubuntu box, and if I type in uname-a, we can see that it's 32-bit architecture and it's Ubuntu. And since this was in transition phase, so let me just type in px and do a grep of that. We see that apparently it is using init process. So it is using that system 5 based initialization for bringing up the certain processes at a certain run level. But if I type in, let's say, cd/etc, and if I do a vi of, or put in, open the editor and try to open the init tab file, we find that there is no init tab file in that directory. Also we see that init control is also available. This command, which is specifically associated with Upstart, we see that this command is available. So Upstart is running on this distribution. Let's have a quick at its directory. And also if I type in, let's say, Upstart, or not Upstart, let's first have a look at its directory by typing in cd and init, and then do an ls over here. We see that we have all these configuration scripts that relate to only Upstart. So if I want to see the status of this, let's say this is Ubuntu firewall script, and even if I open it, let's say do a cat and ubuntu firewall.conf, we see that this says that over here, make sure we want to start before interface. So this is kind of taking care of that dependency problem, that we want to start firewall before an interface comes up, isn't it? And also, instead of putting those all case scripts, we are just saying that which run levels we want it to stop. So if I issue the command like sudo init controller and then status and then Ubuntu firewall to see the status of Ubuntu firewall service, that whether it is running or not, it is running at the moment. So I can make it stop by putting in, let's say, stop and Ubuntu firewall. And now this Ubuntu firewall is in stop state. Now this Ubuntu system, it also has got directory which is init.d, and you know now that this init.d is associated with init. So if we have a look at the contents of this directory by putting ls-l, we see that these scripts, this xinit.d, this udev, this Ubuntu firewall, they are all pointers which are pointing actually to the scripts of Upstart. So just read the documentation that comes with your specific distribution, and also the distributions that are coming nowadays, the later ones, they are having systemd as their default init process. So that's all there is to it as far as understanding of init, upstart and systemd is concerned. We have seen that what are the differences between these three and what are some of the directories where we can find the configuration files and the script related to these initialization processes. I hope you have learned from this video, and I would like to thank you for viewing.